up against? We're up against a lot of things. First of all is the budget squeeze. One of my friends who happened to be a staffer for Senator Glenn, you may remember him, his name is George Crumbar. And he would sit in the corner of Glenn's office and work on budget numbers all day. Everybody thought he was crazy. But he is now the owner and operator of Federal Budget Observer, which is one of the most relied on sources for budget information. He translates what OMB gives you into something you can understand. And I told him I was talking to you, and he said, let's go back to 1970. And I said, why? And you'll see why in a minute. In 1970, we had not yet done the Clean Water Act. We were in the middle of the Vietnam War. But look at the difference in share between entitlement, interest, and discretionary. Discretionary is shorthand in Washington for money that the Congress and President assign by appropriations bill every year. They have some choice about it. Entitlement money is something like Social Security, whereas if you meet the requirements, as long as the law doesn't change, the money goes out. It depends on the eligible population. We were worried at that time about several things. Gas prices for one. The second thing was the debt. This was a very large debt at the time. Next slide, please. Look at the ratio. It was 62% discretionary, 38% entitlements and issues. Now look at it. We're in 2005. Those have flipped. We now have 62% in entitlement payments and interest, and only 38% in discretionary. Two or three things to notice right off. Yes, it's the mirror image of what we once had and worried about. We are spending as a society a huge amount in our seniors. Our children will have to compete with India and China. China has more gifted and talented children than we have children. Our society has chosen to often spend 1,000 times more on its senior citizens than on its youth. This spells trouble. And I'm almost eligible for some of that entitlement money. The second thing is, this slide is in trillions, and the last slide was in billions. And if you look at the interest piece, you'll notice that that is a very, very large number. The House just passed an increase in the debt ceiling, which is a ritual we go through, kabuki drama every so often. We raised the debt ceiling to $9.8 trillion with a T dollars. That amounts to a debt of more than $29,000 for every woman, man, and child in this country. And that is trouble in the future, especially when you note that over $1 trillion of that debt is held by China. Let's go to the discretionary piece. It's like this. Half of that goes for defense. What you have left, take more than 1/3 of it for the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's not included in the congressional budget because it's emergency spending. It's included in George Crumbar's totals for spending because we spent it. The clock moves again. Take what's left and take more than 1/3 of that for Homeland Security. And by that I mean anything we didn't do much of before 9/11 that we're doing a lot of now. That leaves a very narrow sliver of dollars over which Congress and the President have much choice. And that sliver is getting smaller, and it supports everything from medical research, to NASA, to agriculture, to education, to transportation, and the environment. And that squeeze is getting tighter every year. And if you'll notice, it's so small that it doesn't really matter who controls Congress or the White House. You still don't have much room, and you won't have much room for at least the foreseeable future. Now, Democrats and Republicans look at that pie very differently. Republicans like to keep it small. They're a little bit more open to private sector arguments, and they think government is a problem, not a solution. That's a very gross generalization. Democrats are a little more likely to listen to labor. They tend to think of government as the solution to at least some problems. But look at the division in the House and Senate. In the Senate, we have 48-2. Nobody's in control. We just lost a Republican senator. He will be replaced by a Republican senator. So we have 48, 48, and 2, and it's nominally under the control of the Democrats because your independents choose to caucus with the Democrats. I think Bernie Sanders from Vermont will always caucus with the Democrats, or he will leave when Vermont succeeds, which it's considering doing. Joe Lieberman may not. He agrees with the president and the Republicans on the war in Iraq, and he could split. At which point, the vice president is a whole lot more important than he is today. In the House, you tend to think, oh, the Democrats took it over by a huge margin. They have 35 more seats than the Republicans. I'm here to tell you, on an average day, at least 25 Democrats will take a walk on any vote you bring to the floor. The Democratic Party has always been splintered. It's one of the things that makes it interesting and American, and they aren't going to vote as a bloc. The Republicans do tend to vote as a bloc up until recently. Mr. DeLay tended to use a private sector model for control of a democratic institution, and his party paid the price for that. They centralized a great deal of the decision-making. You were not allowed to burp without the DeLay's approval. If even is a senior Republican in the House, it was very tightly controlled. The minute Mr. DeLay is no longer there and the control switched to the Democrats, you have Republicans that have been waiting years to do something independent. So the Republicans are also balkanized. And so to pass anything, you need some kind of alliance between Republicans and Democrats, and especially on things like environment and transportation, those alliances tend to be more regional than party-based anyway. The other thing you notice is that with that narrow margin of control, it will be almost impossible to override a presidential veto. And we're going to get a shot at it later this year because it looks like the president will veto several appropriations bills. They'll probably get to put together into an irresistible omnibus package, and I think he's going to veto it again. He has already said he would veto anything that brings the total above his number. And the Congress wants to spend about $20 billion more than he does. That's 2%. We're arguing about 2% here. Mr. Obey, chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, said it's exactly 2.2%, and that's the difference between a president and a king. So the House is not going to give in gracefully on this, but it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to get enough votes together in either chamber to override a veto. That will probably be true even when we have a new president. So that's how things are changing in Congress. Next slide, please. We're up against a number of things. The budget squeeze is one of them. The next thing is that truck traffic is forecast to increase by 100% in 18 years. That assumes that we use every square or cubic inch of rail capacity we have. And it assumes that you are continuing to improve your highways to the point where that doesn't choke us, which it may. Third thing, the increase in the cost of doing construction projects. I don't need a slide on this. You live it. The cost of concrete, steel, asphalt, all the things you use every day on every project you do has gone up 70% since the last time we increased the gas tax. It's gone up way more than that since we passed the Clean Water Act. So that's another factor you're up against.